Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Remember that this is not a news show. If you're looking for news, go somewhere else. This is a political platform for discussing ideas and talking points. Now, with that out of the way, today's topic I wanted to discuss as I open my refrigerator, which, by the way, before I begin, I just want to address the idiotic rumors about energy drinks containing bull piss or bull semen called taurine. I imagine a lot of people probably think that because of the tar in the name, because that kind of sounds like the Spanish toro or taros. But it's not. It's an amino acid. So yeah. Look at the Mayo Clinic. Oh, hey, look, I drank bull semen. No, I didn't. I drank an amino acid. Anyway. Today's video is a bit fluffy, more fluffier than a lot of my videos recently, which is why I'll probably make an upload 2, because of the sort of fluffy nature of this video. So today I'm going to talk about why America is awesome. This is meant to sort of counter the popular narrative on the left about how America is so horrible and it sucks and oh my god, right? Because they're not actually fair. They're dwelling constantly on the negative and never mentioning a positive ever. You know someone's unreasonable and unfair when they fail to mention a positive and only mention negatives. This becomes obvious in many toxic fandoms like Star Wars or Full Metal Alchemist, right? As sort of an arbitrary example, or even a silly example, unimportant, but it does show you what unreasonability and irrationality look like. Being that, they want to talk about Full Metal Alchemist 2003 like it's, oh, it didn't follow the manga, so it's just automatically terrible. And they only mention negatives. That's because, and the reason why they only mention negatives is because they go looking for negatives, right? They're not coming at it from a fair or a judiciary sort of approach. They're coming at it as guilty until proven innocent. Right? That same principle applies to politics and to the evaluation of a country. They go into it looking for negatives. When really, if you want to be fair to something, you go in there looking for nothing in particular. No particular thing you're looking for. You just go into it looking, period, to look for something to analyze, not anything specific. That way, you can be very neutral and say, oh, there's a positive, there's a positive, there's a negative, there's a negative. Right? The same applies. So, when liberals or progressives or whatever the hell they want to call themselves now, when they talk about America, that's what they do. They'll go in looking for negatives. So I want to counter that narrative and bring us back into a more fair and balanced direction. So this will sort of get into race, ethnic sort of origins and technicalities. So bear with me. So first I'm going to talk about the founding of America and America in general versus other majority white countries. Historically speaking, most majority white countries in Europe, and I apologize if I offend any Europeans, but this is the truth. This is the fucking truth. Most European countries are profoundly authoritarian, and they do not change. A man in England literally got arrested and went to jail for calling a police horse gay. A police horse probably doesn't even know what gay means. Communication between humans and horses is almost entirely physical. A mix of physical body language and eye contact. Communication with horses via verbiage is not really possible. Like, the horse hears the sound but doesn't understand the concept of an assigned meaning. So if you want to communicate with a horse, it's literally just through touch and through eye contact. So walking up to a horse and calling it gay, the horse doesn't know what it means. And the officer was only maybe mildly offended, the officer riding the horse. It's bullshit. That, you know, at the end of the day, the only victim of the crime was the guy who called the police horse gay. And this is just one example of the general authoritarian bent, historically speaking, of most majority white countries, and why the founding fathers of America came from that milieu, came from that culture, and decided, yeah, we've kind of had our fill of that, and we want to make a country that is essentially like the exact opposite of all of that. We want to do something that basically respects the common man and the common citizen, and allows for and creates free, and possibly even creates freedoms that prevent this form of abuse, where a person is essentially ruined, if only for a night, for an ultimately victimless crime. America is the opposite of most historically white nations. It's very much the opposite. Caucasoid culture being heavily influenced by whoever the most popular philosopher is at the time, or whoever is the perceived authority figure, handing down the order and telling people what to do. America was created partially to be the opposite of that. A system where instead of it was top down, it was more bottom up, where the bottom man was given the rights and freedoms and could also vote. So in a sense, the politician can only gain power if the man at the bottom of the pecking order gave it to him. This is essentially maximalizing the concept of democracy to its zenith. That was the basic idea. Right. Essentially, so Europeans, first wave or second or even third wave immigrants, could come to a nation that was the opposite of what they were used to. No more dictatorships. No more abuse. The founding of America was in the crucible of rebellion. It was a rebellion against England. It was a rebellion against the cultural norms of the era. It was the original liberal before the term was changed in the 80s, and then again abandoned, so we can take the term liberal back and restore its original meaning, which was to say that it was not left-wing, but a centrist ideology of defying authoritarianism and statism, which was so normal for the time period. And again, I wanted to discuss guilty until proven innocent versus innocent until proven guilty. Guilty until proven innocent, the assumption of guilt, again, is looking specifically for negatives, looking specifically for guilt. Because of the nature of the human psyche, this approach causes people to behave in an unfair manner. It causes them to behave unfairly and extrajudicially. In essence, guilty until proven innocent, causing you to seek negatives first, often means that single-minded approach causes you to ignore positives. And because you ignore positives, you ignore the possibility or potential for innocence. Whereas if you operate from the assumption of innocence until proven guilty, you are not only searching for positives, you are searching for the possibility of both innocence and guilt. Not to mention, if you're looking purely for guilt first, as guilty until proven innocent, you visit all sorts of abuses upon the accused. Whereas, innocent until proven guilty, there will be no abuse heaped upon the accused. So it's much safer, it's more humane. It does not destroy the innocent the way guilty until proven innocent does. It doesn't really destroy, it merely investigates. Looking for, I'd say taking a more neutral position, as undecided until proven guilty or innocent, might be more neutral and unbiased. But without a doubt, innocent until proven guilty is superior because it does not seek to abuse nor does not seek an automatic negative. It's safer and it's easier to avoid cruel, unusual punishment, which again, the Founding Fathers wanted to leave the typical white European experience behind. The authoritarianism that pan-European peoples were so accustomed to. They wanted to leave all of that behind and go the opposite direction. And innocent till proven guilty was a huge part of that. Not only the individual rights and freedoms, maximalized democracy, small government, and so forth, but innocent until proven guilty was huge. Very significant. It was true progress in every sense of the word for Western civilization at the time. This is just one of the many things that actually makes America extremely awesome. Then, of course, you want to talk about LGBT rights in America, or LGB, because honestly, gender is a completely separate issue from sexual orientation, so it's actually kind of stupid to sort of lump us all in together. Suffice to say, rights, thanks to the Stonewall riots, which, by the way, was not caused by a trans woman of color, it was caused by two gay men, who, as one of them later came out as trans. But because the left is so insistent on representing transgender people of darker skin colors at the cost of everyone else, that's their current crusade. They have to change history to suit their agenda, which is what they always do. They always change history to suit their agenda. That's what progressives do. They want to increase diversity and inclusion in Europe, so they change history to suggest that some Native Europeans were black, even though, according to evolutionary science, that was literally ridiculous and impossible, because the whole purpose of melanin was protection from the sun. And if you had high melanin in Europe before climate control was the thing you could have in your homes or your vehicles, like, you were fucked as far as vitamin C. So unless you ate like a fuck ton of oranges, like, you were screwed. Because it's a relatively cold environment. A native European cannot have skin that dark. They would die of malnourishment because they couldn't produce enough. They'd have scurvy. They'd be riddled with scurvy. But so that goes against evolutionary science. People adapted these skin colors and these races so they could survive in multiple different environments. Lighter skin in colder environments and darker skin in warmer environments. But because the progressives want diversity, inclusion, blah, 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 they got to go back, they got to change the history and change the context and recontextualize and view 1885, let's say, through the lens of 2021. Essentially disregarding anything related to hermeneutics, which is a horrendous notion. It is absolutely horrendous. You cannot understand history that way. Not even remotely. But regardless, it really was the Stonewall riots caused by two gay men that really furthered LGBT rights in America. Progressives at one point were actually pretty decent people. When it comes right down to it, progressives are really terrible at governing. Like, they cannot govern. Period. But what they are good at is criticizing. Progressives actually make very fine critics. They're very good at criticizing the system and identifying areas where it's not working. But when it comes to governing, conservatives are by and large superior. They know the system better, they know how to handle the system better, they understand that tradition introduces a concept of not only identity, but stability, i.e. identifying what works and continuing to do what works until it no longer does. Ideally, a conservative's place is in running the system and conserving culture, conserving tradition, and even conserving nature. Essentially the Teddy Roosevelt approach. Nature conservationism is literally a conservative policy in the classic sense of the word. I need my caffeine and amino acids. But whereas progressives are very good at criticizing and identifying areas where the system's not working. So the progressives and conservatives can work together to fix the issue. That is to say, if tribalism and vilifying of the scary other was not a problem, which it most certainly is. We are currently living in an era where that sort of thing is just wildly out of control. We've never had the amount of tribalism and scaremongering about the other more than we have it now. It's the worst it's ever been in recent history. And the system is slowly breaking down as a result. And if we don't do something to curb it, we might have like a small handful of presidents here and there before the thing finally just collapses into utter chaos. We might make 5 presidents. But when the progressives acknowledge their place, they are a force for positive change. They can be. And in the case of LGBT rights advancement in America with the Stonewall riots and policy changes and the response to the AIDS pandemic in the 80s, which was somewhat botched by Dr. Fauci, the progressives have been probably the greatest force to help the LGBT community achieve acceptance in larger society. But because of the current Marxist zeitgeist and the progressives moving further and further left and becoming extremely violent and animosity, they're actually harming LGBT acceptance now. But in the beginning, LGBT rights were championed by the progressives back when they were more centrist and more sane. See, this is what I've said many times. The closer you are to the Overton window, the saner things get. The further away you move from it, either far right or far left, the crazier and crazier it gets. You have the insane far left who thinks that capitalism and fascism are directly tied and there can be no separation, even though fascism has historically had closer relationships with socialism. Because the early speeches of Adolf Hitler were rife with all of the socialist cliches, and his ideology of National Socialism was based on Marxism. Fascism has ties to socialism, not capitalism. Fascism seeks centrality. Capitalism inherently ruins centrality by decentralizing the economy through a distribution through a market. So they're actually not only mutually exclusive from one another, but directly opposed. But when you're far, far left, with all of the alternative facts and alternative, almost cult-like, right, with all the manipulation, you can't see the forest for the trees. And then you go far right, and it gets even crazier still with QAnon and its neo-satanic panic, believing that there's satanic pedophile cannibals in government essentially raping, then cooking and eating children. For Satan, supposedly. And of course, there's no evidence for any of it. Any evidence they present is like Michelle Remembers, the widely debunked Satanic Panic book written by Lawrence Pasder. Yeah, but the closer you get to that Overton window, the saner things become. And when the left is sane, it champions many, many great things, such as LGBT rights in America. This is a country where a person like me, a bisexual, does not have to worry about an angry Muslim escorting me up to the top of a building and then throwing me off to my death. I don't have to worry about that in America. I'm safe here. I'm free here. And America achieved that. America did that. That is a great thing about America. And in general, we're treated better in America than any other country in the world. Any other country in the world. Yes, you have LGBT people being thrown out of homes before they're old enough to take care of themselves and they become homeless. You have physical abuse, verbal abuse, etc. But it's still not as bad as other countries. You still don't have to worry about getting murdered. And I know there's people who say, parents who say they would murder their kid if they were LGBT, but most of it is hyperbole. It's mostly hyperbolic. They're just expressing their emotion. They're expressing emotional feelings. Hyperbole is a perfectly acceptable form of communication, because oftentimes in order to express how you truly feel about something, speaking literally and technically is not necessarily the best fit. If you want to express your feelings, you have to use hyperbole. It's not the literal action you would take, it's just how you feel about it. So it's mostly hyperbole. A lot of them saying they would do it, they wouldn't actually do it. They're just communicating their feelings. You know, it's certainly not something a computer would understand, but a human being with a heart and emotion would understand it just fine. It's still disgusting and vicious and evil and wrong, but it is hyperbole at the end of the day. We are treated so much better here. So even for LGBT people, America is great in comparison to the rest of the world. We are better treated here than anywhere else. We won't be killed. We won't be abused. And for the most part, you know, even if we can't get married to a same-sex partner, we can still seek a domestic partnership, which in other parts of the country, which in other parts of the world, even that alone would not be available. So America is great for LGBT people, and it is great for minorities by comparison. And of course, who can forget the 1964 Civil Rights Act and civil rights victories in general? The 1964 Civil Rights Act, which was originally penned by Kennedy, but because Kennedy lacked clout, right? Kennedy was not very well respected. He was sort of seen as a sort of a young punk president. And as a result, he lacked the necessary clout, not to mention failures such as the Bay of Pigs and the rumors of Cuba invasion prior to the Cuban Missile Crisis. He wasn't looking too good. When he drafted it in 1962, people were just kind of like, oh, Kennedy drafted this? Bleh. But then frickin' LBJ takes office, and because LBJ is a respected professional, also a very inhuman son of a bitch, by the way, but suffice to say, he had way more clout in the Senate, way more clout in the government. He was respected. He had many victories prior to that, and you know, when he decided to take failed policies of Kennedy and enact them in his place, boom! 1964 Civil Rights Act signed, boom, he says, I'll have those niggers voting Democrat for 200 years. And yes, I said the word, I don't fucking care, because I'm just quoting the man. And I know frickin' Snopes is like, oh, he didn't really say that. Yeah, except that you don't have proof that he didn't say it. You couldn't prove it concretely any more than you could prove it completely that he did say it. I say he said it for one simple reason. Because it's perfectly in character with who Lyndon Baines Johnson was as a person. That's exactly something he would motherfucking say. You know why he signed that 1964 Civil Rights Act. Power. Personal power. Party line. Preparing the Democratic Party for their flip-flop from the Conservative Party of the South, the Party of Reconstruction, to a liberal party. The flip-flop. Why? Because Democrats, at the end of the day, the only thing they care about is winning. The only reason why they're still progressive today is progressivism is popular. As soon as progressivism becomes unpopular, they're going to flip-flop again. Because in history, that is what they have done. Why would they stop? No, man, they're not going to stop. They're just going to keep fucking going. They're just going to keep up with it. They're going to flip-flop on this and that and the other thing. Don't forget that Bernie Sanders was all like billionaires and millionaires. And then suddenly it was just billionaires. Because he became a millionaire himself. He flip-flopped. Now imagine Bernie Sanders becoming a millionaire. What will he say then? This is what Democrats do. They flip-flop and they change. But regardless, with the 1964 Civil Rights Act, we began to see the right to vote, various other forms of personal liberties, previously only guaranteed to the white population, now guaranteed to blacks and Native Americans and Mexicans and whatever the fuck else. And there's been many civil rights victories since. There's been entire families lifted up out of poverty. It's still not enough. There's still tons of minorities in poverty, but there's plenty who have been lifted out of poverty due to civil rights victories and opportunities granted. The mistake that left them in the ghettos and in poverty has been largely corrected, and progress is still ongoing. The progress train is still going. Nothing's stopping it. Even the most insane leftist who's actually regressive can't really stop it. The problem is being corrected. And that's something that can also make America great. The fact that we're recovering from a historic mistake and that things are always improving. They're always getting better. Every day. That's greatness. That's America. Now I want to talk to you about the value of American currency. The value of the dollar. When it comes right down to it, GDP, or gross domestic product, is the end goal of capitalism. To raise the gross domestic product to its highest level. To raise the value of the currency so that the dollar goes farther and achieves more. And it is through this that you can be lifted out of poverty. We live like kings compared to our ancestors. European kings, or even peasants, my ancestors, could never have dreamed of a computer, a webcam, this here, maybe even, a smart TV, video game consoles, this. It produces so much plenty, capitalism. And it is things that many of my ancestors could never have dreamed of even ever possessing. We live like kings compared to them. We have things that they never would have had in their lifetimes. Ever. And once upon a time, a person could not have owned a TV at all, and only the rich could have owned it. But as GDP increased, we see that the working class could eventually own a TV. And by 1958. And then, in the 1970s, you could own 2 TVs. And by the 1980s, you might have even owned 3 TVs. Or at least one really crappy TV and one really great TV. And now, we have $100 smart TVs, 720p resolution, or 4K as the gross domestic product increases. It doesn't just apply to luxuries either. Once upon a time, you might have only been able to buy, let's say, for $50, you might have got 2 loaves of bread, a head of broccoli, and maybe some peas. Now you can get for $50 4 loaves of bread, 6 bags of peas, and 2 heads of broccoli. Because the product of vegetables, as the means of production becomes easier due to investment, they can produce more and sell more. And that is the power of capitalism, and that makes America great. When it comes right down to it, the mindset you have to vilify or to hate America requires that you ignore the fact that progress exists, of this nature exists. You have to ignore the fact that the kind of hatred and violence that used to exist in this nation, by and large, now no longer exists. People are accepted. People are happy. There are no Klansmen hanging black people to death. There are Klansmen, but they're no longer able to exercise power or violence the way they once did. Now it's impossible, because people remember these things. People remember. And not only that, in general, you would have to be blind to all of the progress made and all of the great things about America and only see negatives to have the mindset to hate such a great country. Right? You would have to be selectively blind and ignore most of it to have that mindset. In many ways, it's very cult-like. Because as I said, cults have alternative facts to the rest of mainstream society mixed with informational control and often behavioral control. And in many ways, the left is beginning to resemble a cult. Very much so. And even the weirdest far-right groups are not anywhere near as cult-like as the left has become. The far left, especially. And in many ways, progressives have kind of become leftism light, right? They agree with leftists on... Progressives agreeing with leftists on multiple different ideas. CRT started out as a leftist policy, a far-left political doctrine, until progressives started kind of seeing it, thinking, oh, this is kind of neat, and then they start adopting it. Progressives are leftism light. And even they're beginning to become part of the cult now. So even someone who is actually kind of moderate can still occasionally espouse some of the far-left cult ideas. And that's the sort of mindset you have to be in to hate America. Insane. Capitalism produced my caffeine. Anyway, that's about all. Tschüss, peace.